Right, it's Andrew McCarthy again. Here's something that I'm hoping you're going to find interesting. The pond that you see behind me. It's not a lake. Remember that. In Newfoundland, we don't have lakes, as my mother loves to remind guests. A lake in Newfoundland is a hole in your boot. I got a lake in my boot. I was speaking with Mark Hiscock earlier this week. I was a little bit confused because for years we've been calling this Soldier's Pond. And the further I've hiked back into the country here, all of a sudden I realized that Soldier's Pond is quite a ways back towards the bottom of Freshwater Bay. So when I questioned Mark, he said, boy, I don't know if it has a name. He says, I don't even know if it's really a pond. You'll see behind me, there's a dam built. Right? He said, that used to just be a hole, blast hole pond maybe. And what it is a water supply for a thermal generating station that used to be located down in Wyrms Cove. Regardless, it got me talking about the fact, or thinking about the fact that in Newfoundland, I joked earlier about the fact that we don't have any lakes. All we have is ponds. Now, by definition, but the difference between a pond and a lake, all right? A pond has to sustain bottom growth throughout. It can't generate waves that are more than a foot in height, and it has to have uniform temperature throughout. Now, by that definition, most of the water bodies, and we always argue that 50% of Newfoundland is covered in fresh water, so that's an awful lot of ponds, lakes, rivers, and streams. By definition, they would all be lakes, yet in Newfoundland, we refer to every single one of them as ponds, no matter what their size. If they get really large, then we call them big ponds, and I can assure you there's a lot of big ponds in Newfoundland. The reason for this, right, you have to remember where everybody comes from in Newfoundland, right? Everybody in Newfoundland looks just like me because everybody in Newfoundland hails basically from two different areas. They come from Bristol, and if not Bristol itself, then certainly from the Bristol Channel. Other than that, they come from Waterford, or within a very, very small range of Waterford. You have to remember, during the 1600s, ships would leave Bristol and they would leave the Bristol Channel. They would cross, I think it's called the St. George's Channel. They would land in Waterford, which was a breadbasket. They would take on supplies. They would take on young men that would have looked like me at a much younger age, mind you. And they would make the crossing to Newfoundland. Right, when they got here, there was nobody here to teach them anything. They were left pretty much in isolation. All that they did was fish, right? You'll notice on maps, if you look at the Bristol Channel, if you look in Waterford, there are no ponds. My apologies. There's no lakes. They have very, very small bodies of water. Everything there is a pond. Thus, when these new immigrants arrived in Newfoundland and eventually settled here, they didn't have a word to describe anything that was larger than a small pond. Thus, they all became ponds. How's that for some information?